Over the next few weeks, we'll be learning more about some of the local candidates who are campaigning to represent our area. This week, we'll meet with the 3 candidates running for the U.S. House of Representatives in Indiana's 8th District. That's next on WNIN Newsmakers. Joining us now is the Democratic candidate for Indiana Congressional House District 8, Ray McCormick. Thanks for being here.
I'm glad to be here.
So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'm a farmer from southern Knox County, but I've worked on conservation all of my life. And I've worked for many different causes around the state, and things like the goose pond and taking care of our soils and climate change and endangered species and a lot of farm issues. So I've just had a full life of advocating for wildlife, for natural resources, the environment, and so forth. So.
All right. So what are your qualifications, do you feel like, for holding this position?
My qualifications are, number 1, that I'm a hard worker. Number 2, I'm good to my word. Number 3, I'm going all over the 21 counties and meeting with people. Unlike my opponent, who lives in Washington, D.C. and never comes here, is I am highly engaged with the folks and understand what their issues and how I can help them, and that's why I'm running for office. I have a beautiful farm that I live on with Labrador retrievers and a great family and so forth, but this land's been good to me and I've always cared about it, and I want to do all I can while I'm still around to help southwestern Indiana, west central Indiana, help the land, help the people, and make it a better place so our children want to stay here and live here.
All right. So if you are elected into this position, what would be your top priority or priorities, and how would you handle them?
Well, my top priority would be to serve the people of the district, and the only way you can do that is to have grown up here. I'm 4 generations of living here, meeting with people and understanding. So that's been part of my campaign, is listening to people so that I can better understand when I'm elected in November how I get off to a fast start, how I help teachers, nurses, farmers, everyone out there that needs some help, the disadvantaged, getting children into Head Start, nutrition. There's so many things we can help with. Housing is a big issue in Evansville, but it's a big issue in all these small towns, like the small town I came from. So there's a bunch of issues to engage with the people and understand how to help them. Is my qualification is that I've done great things all of my life, have accomplished a lot, but mainly through partnerships with women and men and politicians and conservation organizations, so I know how to put people together, how to unite people together to get big things done, and I can do it, and I will do it for the 8th District.
So in those conversations that you've had with many of the constituents throughout the district, what are some of the top priorities that you're hearing coming from both the rural towns and the bigger cities?
That's a great question, because that's changed since I started running. You know, as you go out and shake hands with people and you say something to them about who you are and everything, the number 1 thing is people want hope that you can make things better. They're worried about our country. They're worried about our government. They're worried about the direction we're going. And somehow, being a farmer, they think you can help them. And it's not help them personally, help them help our country. So they're more concerned about our country than they are of me helping them with whatever needs they have. So that's a big issue. Women's rights and a right to their health and so forth is a big issue that I hear a lot about. And then when I talk to young couples that have children, so when you go to parades and festivals and you go downtown like last night in Evansville, talking about the future, the quality of life, and climate change and what we can do about climate change, those are really big things to people that are raising children in this area, and that's who I want to help.
Well, a lot of people are talking about term limits. Do you feel like there should be term limits?
We have a congressman that has been in there for 12 years. 99% of the people in the 21 counties cannot name their congressman. So when you have the ability and the power to stay in office for 12 years and nobody knows who you are, we need term limits. The power that you get from representing drug companies and medical companies or other corporations, that power over them makes it easy to get campaign money, it gets easy to get endorsements, and it gets easy to just stay in Washington, D.C. Larry Bouchon said, "I'm unbeatable." And my wife charged in the room and said, "Now run for office." So I'd been wanting to run for a long time and so forth, but I had a big farm to take care of, and now my son's old enough. So yes, term limits, 10 years, congressman, 2 terms, senators.
Right.
I'm for term limits.
So how do you view the role of government? You mentioned people wanting hope and some of the things that they feel like government can give to them. So as you're looking to be elected into this position, how do you view your role and the role of the government as a whole?
The role of the government as a whole is at the local level. That's what I've worked with. So for instance, the Natural Resources Conservation Service, those are great people dedicated to conservation. And they're the mechanism where we put these government taxpayers on the land to take care of the land. So whether it's a mail carrier, or it's a conservation person, or it's somebody working for the environment, or whether it's a teacher, government people are not just the people in Washington, D.C. These are the people that are my friends. These are the people in our community, and they bring all of these assets and services to our community. So I'm a big fan of the government because of all these things. We don't have these things because somebody just made it up. We have these things because people were elected, because people wanted to clean up rivers that caught on fire. People wanted to keep the land in place and not have it blow away in the Dust Bowl. People wanted rural electric cooperatives, and they wanted public schools and so forth. So I'm not an anti-government person. When people insult the government, they're insulting my friends that are underpaid and underappreciated.
So before our time is up, is there anything else that you would like voters to know about you and your qualifications for this position?
Well, that I've worked hard all of my life on a farm. People say, boy, this must be hard work campaigning. And I go, I picked watermelons and I baled hay, and I've done a lot of hard work 7 days a week, and then took all the time I could to help serve our country by fighting for all these conservation causes. We're not going to have a great future unless we keep our topsoil in place, we have clean water, and we have air that's fresh and healthy, and we have to take care of our land because people are going to move away if we keep going in the direction we're going. I want people to stay here. I want my grandchildren to want to live here, and that's what everybody else would like.
All right.
Thank you for having me today.
Thanks for being on today. We appreciate your time.
And thanks.
Joining us now is the Libertarian candidate for Indiana Congressional House District 8, Indy Horning. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me here.
So tell our viewers a little bit about yourself.
Well, I live on a little farm in Freedom, Indiana, which is in Owen County, kind of not exactly the middle of this huge district, but it's kind of south central Indiana. And I work in the medical industry from home, mostly, designing and implementing medical imaging devices and software.
Awesome. So if you were elected to a position such as this, what would be your top priority?
Well, first of all, the top priority is busting up this crony network that is tearing us apart. So the two-party system that our founders warned us about extensively is a big problem now, and only voters can fix that. But once voters decide to start cleaning house, the biggest problem I would have, and the biggest problem I think we all have, is kind of extricating ourselves from the mess of corruption where most of our laws are not written by lawmakers, they're written by unelected bureaucrats. We've got too much connection between the money in campaigns and the outcome of that with the strings attached and the policy that comes out of it. So really my top priority is corruption, cleaning up what has been destroyed of our constitutional rule of law.
So what are some of the other issues that you see as most important to address in Congress beyond that very same thing?
Well, Congress has not been doing its job. When it comes to things like actually managing what money is, we've handed that over to the Federal Reserve System long ago. And that is the source of we hear all kinds of stuff that isn't true about inflation. The real source of inflation is the fact that we've been printing up too much money. And the more money that you're spewing out, the less every dollar is worth. And that's something that Nobel Prize economists and everybody else who's serious about it has known for a long time. So there's no mystery about why we have the inflation we have today, and that is a constitutional corruption. We're supposed to have Congress in charge of the Treasury, and the Treasury is supposed to be emitting the dollars. That's not the way it works, and it hasn't since 1913, and it's only been getting worse since the 1930s and so on. So we have some structural problems with the way our money is made, with the spending that we do, that we're way past broke. And when you think about the problems with Social Security and Medicare funding and so on, and the demographic issues associated with that, there's an awful lot to clean up and get back to some kind of constitutional, or at least some kind of moral design to this monster we call government.
So some people mention that there should be term limits. You mentioned the corruption, but some are promoting the idea of term limits. Do you feel like there should be term limits?
I didn't used to, because that's what voters are supposed to do. But yes, I do believe in term limits, and I think they should be fairly short for legislators, because the entrenchment, the power that comes with entrenchment is just too great and too seductive for people, and they think that experience is a good thing, when really experience in DC is corruption. You're there too long and you fester. And if, let's put it another way. If you're in Congress for a couple of terms and you haven't come up with your grand scheme, if you haven't done what motivated you to get there, you're probably not going to.
So how many limits do you feel like, how many terms do you feel like should be the limit?
I would think reasonable would be maybe 4 for U.S. House and 2 for U.S. Senate.
All right. So how do you view the role of government? You had mentioned some of the corruption and some of the deep-seated issues. So how do you view the role?
Well, government is really supposed to only protect our contracts, our physical bodies from external force. So basically, we're supposed to be protected from force, fraud, and coercion. But unfortunately, government is force, fraud, and coercion too often. And so really the thing that has to happen with government is it itself has to be governed. That's what the constitutions are for. And without any sort of framework on the governing agency or the regulator, we have an ungoverned power. And that's more dangerous than anything else in human history. I mean, that's if you were to think about what the story of human history is, it's 100% failure of our governments because we fail to govern our government. So the role of government is not that it's a necessary evil so much as it is an inevitable one. We will have a king. That's just the way we humans work. We're kind of a follow of the alpha species. But the thing that most has to be governed is government. And when we have a focused government where it's written down that it's only supposed to do a few things, and to be super clear here, the federal government is supposed to do very, very little. If you read the federal Constitution, it's short, it's actually very simple. The 9th and 10th Amendments clarify exactly the limitations of our rights and the government's powers. And so basically the 9th Amendment says we have all the rights that are not specifically taken away, but the 10th Amendment says government has no power that's not specifically granted to it. So all the confusion people say exists in the Constitution doesn't really exist. It's actually very clear.
Well, before our time is up, is there anything else that you would like voters to know about you and about your positions in terms of this congressional?
I have been writing. I had a column in the Indianapolis Star. I wrote for Indiana Policy Review Foundation. For about 30 years now, I've been correctly predicting the problems that we have today and proposing solutions that have been proven to work. So there should at some point come up, a time when we say, all right, maybe we should stop re-electing the people who have always been wrong, and maybe start looking at some of the people who've been right, at least from time to time. And I've got a long record in writing where I can, you can take a look at what I've written in my blogs and all of this stuff for 30 years and see that I really have been saying the same thing for 30 years. And what I said was going to happen is happening. And I think I've got solutions for all of this that our founders gave us a long time ago.
All right. Well, Andy Horning, thank you for your time today.
Thank you.
We appreciate your information.
Thanks.
Now joining us is the Republican candidate for Indiana Congressional House District 8, also the incumbent, Dr. Larry Bucshon. Thank you so much for joining us.
Sure, it's great to be with you.
So, Dr. Bucshon, tell us a little bit more about yourself. We're kind of asking the same questions of everyone, so
Sure, well, I was a heart surgeon before I was in Congress, but I've always been interested in public policy. And so I ran for Congress in 2010, and I was fortunate enough to get elected and then re-elected by the people of the 8th District. It's an honor and a privilege to represent them. And so I'm running for re-election because I still have the passion to help people like I did when I was a heart surgeon. And I think it's important to have medical people in the Congress because healthcare costs are still a big challenge. So, I'm campaigning on what I've done. I've been very prominent in the healthcare space in Washington, D.C. We made some progress, not a lot. But also, I represent a big agricultural and manufacturing district. So I spend time with in those areas, but so I was a heart surgeon helping people, and I'm just helping people in a different way. And I've been fortunate enough that the people of the 8th District have thought I'm doing a fine job.
All right. Well, if you are re-elected, what will be your priority? What will be your top priority now?
Yeah, I think right now, the American people are concerned about inflation and high energy costs, and I think the priority going into the next Congress for me is going to be to get energy costs down, honestly, and get America back to where we're more energy independent so we can get the cost of gasoline down and get this inflation under control. Federal spending has been an issue. We've spent too much money, and that's driving inflation. So those are the things I'm going to work on: federal spending, energy issues, and then, of course, healthcare. Healthcare costs are too high, and we need more transparency in the healthcare system so the consumer can help drive down the cost.
So those are some of your top issues. Do you see any other issues that might kind of bubble to the top for you beyond energy and healthcare?
Yeah, I think people are concerned about crime across the country. In our area, it's not that big of an issue, but when you go to Indianapolis or you go to other areas around the country, we've had an uptick in crime, and I think some of that is related to the anti-police movement that you've seen over the years, the last couple of years. Not from me, but from people on the other side of the aisle, from myself. And, funding, and funding for law enforcement. So I think crime is a big issue. The other one is the border. Southern border of the country is wide open. And my big concern, honestly, is the fentanyl that's coming across the southern border. We're having over 100,000 of our fellow citizens last year die of fentanyl poisoning, essentially, and most of that's coming from the southern border. So those are a couple of the other big issues I think people are concerned about.
All right. There's been a lot of talk about term limits. Do you think there should be term limits? And if so, how many terms should be the limit?
Yeah, I've always been in favor of term limits. It's a high bar because you have to have a constitutional amendment to make that happen. You can't just pass a law. But I don't plan to be on Congress forever. I have had a career as a heart surgeon. I'm going to do my part in Washington, D.C., and then I plan to have another career after Washington. So, I think depending on what we can do with the constitutional amendment, how many terms, it's hard to say, but I think, when you've been in Congress a decade or a little longer than that, that's getting up there, right? So we need to look at that. But what we want to do is also, just like any other organization, we want to have experienced people who are at the end of their career, people in the middle of their career, and then we want to have new voices elected to Congress so that you have that whole group of people that can make the best decisions for the American people.
All right. Now, you've been in the Congress for quite some time now. So having had that experience, how do you now view the role of government?
Well, I mean, it's different, of course. I mean, my feeling is most decisions need to be made as close to the people as possible. So, you know, local government, state government, the decisions that they can make without the influence of the federal government, I favor that. You know, the federal government has a primary role of defending the country and developing infrastructure and things like that. And so, you know, I want the federal government to do the things we're supposed to do and try to do them well, and rely on local and state governments to do the things that the federal government isn't involved in. So I see it as a bottom-up, not a top-down government, and that's the way I think the Founding Fathers wanted. They wanted local and state government to have most of the control, whether that's education, whether that's healthcare, even whether that's infrastructure.
All right. Well, before our time is up, is there anything else that you would like our viewers to know about you or about your stance on anything?
Well, I think people should know that I'm just as passionate today about what I'm doing on their behalf as I was when I was first elected. I think, again, it's been an honor and a privilege to represent the people of the 8th District. And I also want to say this, I'm optimistic about the future of the country. And I want people to know that people on both sides of the aisle in Washington, in contrast to what you see on TV, really do want to work together and solve problems on behalf of the American people. You know, we've been doing this for what, 240 some years? So I want people to know that their representatives on both sides of the aisle have a lot of confidence in the American people and the American way of governing. And so that's why everyone should be optimistic, even though we have some challenges that we're facing.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Representative Bouchon.
Yeah, you're
we
welcome.
appreciate your time.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Thanks again to all the candidates in the Indiana Congressional House District 8 race for joining us. Next week, we'll be meeting some more local candidates. Thanks for watching WNIN Newsmakers.